Hey, good morning. It's Uncle Lou here. Yeah, that's right. It's me, Uncle Lou, live for you on LouTube today. And thanks for watching. As usual, I really appreciate it. So thank you. A little something different today. I don't cover a lot of news stories here. This is college football channel, and I tend to be more of a reaction and opinion type of person. So I don't cover a whole lot of quote unquote news stories related to college football. But I'm going to make an exception today because I think this is a big deal. But these new red shirt rules, right? That just got announced by the NCAA. Now, most people that watch this channel are avid enough college football fans or have been following college football long enough and are informed enough. Most of you guys probably know what the term red shirt means, but to those of you that might be watching that don't, basically what a red shirt means is that it's just a player that doesn't play that year, okay, for whatever reason, usually because they're not ready or they're so far down the depth chart. Usually a freshman, he comes in, right, maybe there's a couple people ahead of him on the depth chart, so he ends up not playing at all his freshman year. That year gets designated as his redshirt year. Why is that important? Well, a player has 5 years total to compete for 4 years. You have 5 years of eligibility as an athlete in college, and you can play in 4 of those years. That's where the 5th year would then be a redshirt year, a year in which you did not play at all. Like I said, usually designated for freshmen. That has changed. Now you are allowed to play in up to 4 games in a season and still maintain your redshirt eligibility. And if that sounds kind of confusing, maybe I'm not explaining it very good, but let me just give you an example here. A player enrolls at a school, okay? He's 3rd, 4th, 5th on the depth chart, whatever. The season starts along. We're in week 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. He hasn't played at all year, right? It's looking like it's going to be a redshirt year for him. Well, week 11 or 12 comes around. The team gets a couple of injuries. This freshman, this kid who hasn't played at all season, ends up having to go in the last week of the season or the bowl game even and play a series, a quarter, 1 snap, whatever. His entire year of eligibility would be gone under the old system. He would have then used 1 of his 4 years of eligibility, making him ineligible to receive his red shirt for that year in which he played in 1 snap or 1 quarter or whatever. That has changed, and a player can now play in up to 4 games and still maintain his red shirt eligibility. Now, a red shirt isn't something that has to be designated at the beginning of the year, and it never has been. Right? Red shirts are awarded, and there is no physical red shirt. This is just a term used to describe this type of player, but they're designated at the end of the year. So the season comes and goes, it's over. You look at your roster, any player that didn't play at all can be designated as a red shirt. And what that means is he didn't use 1 of his 4 years of eligibility during that season. This is where you hear the term redshirt freshman, redshirt sophomore. Everyone knows a freshman means it's your first year, right? Well, if you come in as a freshman and don't play at all and take a red shirt, your 2nd year, academically, you'd be a sophomore, but athletically, you'd still be a freshman, and you would be referred to by announcers and in the program guide and everything else as a redshirt freshman. So if you see a guy and he's a redshirt junior, that's actually his 4th year at that school. And that's sort of how the whole thing works. You get 5 years to play in 4 years. Used to be, if you played even 1 snap in a season, that was 1 of your 4 years of eligibility. Now the change is you can play in up to 4 games. Now, why does this matter? Well, number one, the seasons are a lot longer now than they used to be 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago. You used to play 10 games a season. Now you play 12. Used to be just a maximum of 1 game after your regular season, making it maybe an 11-game season. Now with conference championships and the playoffs, you can actually play in up to 15 games a year. And a lot of teams play in 14 games. If you take the 12 regular season games, a conference championship game, and then a bowl game, that's 14. So you got a lot of teams playing in 14 games, 2 teams playing in 15 games, and a whole bunch of other schools playing in 13 and 12 games. Season a lot longer, which means you're more likely to have injuries. Now, what does injuries have to do with the new redshirt rule? Well, let's say you have a player, like we mentioned in the beginning, that's 3rd or 4th on the depth chart, hasn't played all year, and a guy goes down in week 10, and you got 2 games left. You can play that freshman without him burning his entire year of eligibility, because he'll play the last 2 games of the regular season in a bowl game. That would be 3 games. Even if he plays a conference championship game in a bowl game, that's 4 games. He can still keep and claim a red shirt for that season, meaning his second year, he would be a redshirt freshman and still have 4 full years of eligibility left. That's a huge deal. Number 2, I think this is a motivating factor for players on the team. I think players who are expecting to be redshirted at the end of the year, who don't expect they're going to play that much because of, they're way behind on the depth chart, or they're not physically developed enough, or whatever the case may be. I think this new rule motivates those players to push themselves harder and try harder and apply themselves that much more at practice throughout the season, knowing that if the right situation arises, they may be put into that game. Even though the coaches want to save his red shirt, he can now participate in up to 4 games a year. I think this will cause a lot of these players to really stay more focused throughout the season when otherwise they may not, knowing that they'll never have a chance to play in a game. And some people say, well, these kids are elite athletes, Lou. They always going to give it their all and try their hardest. Well, there's quotes all over the internet this week from people like Nick Saban, Dan Mullen, Kirby Smart, lots of different coaches making this same point that I just said. In fact, that's where I got it from, that coaches have noticed that freshmen in particular who know they're not going to play because of the redshirt rules tend to lose focus as the season goes along. And this new rule, I think, and these coaches agree, will prevent some of that from happening. Little Johnny, who enrolls at Alabama, knows he's not going to play at all. Now we'll say, well, you know what? There is a chance I could play. And you got these teams that play, that schedule cupcake teams, right? Everybody does it. I'll use Georgia's schedule as an example this year. Week 1, we play something called Austin P. If we have players who Kirby is looking at and saying, you know what, this kid's probably going to need a redshirt year this year, we can still play him in that Austin P game, whether it's the second half when it's a blowout or whatever the case may be. We've got cupcakes later in the season, same type of thing. So I think these kids will try harder in practice and stay more involved in everything that's going on. Another issue, a lot of top players lately, over the last 3 or 4 years really, are deciding to sit out their team's bowl game, unless it's a playoff game. But if it's just a regular bowl game, a lot of your elite top 10, first round type talent kids coming out of college entering the NFL the following season are choosing to sit out the bowl game rather than risk injury in playing in a quote unquote meaningless game. Well, that looks to me like a trend that's going to continue. I don't think we're going to see less people doing that as we go forward. I think we're going to actually see more people, more kids, more college athletes choosing that route as we go forward, sitting out that bowl game. Well, if you've got these kids who haven't played all that much this year or haven't played at all, you can reward them at the end of the season, whether they've been doing practice squad work for your team, whatever. They've been practicing all year knowing they weren't going to play. You can reward these kids with some playing time in your team's bowl game without blowing an entire year of eligibility. Now, unfortunately, this new rule is not retroactive. It's just effective starting for the 2018 season. So if you have a guy on your team that only played in 2 games last year, he's not eligible to claim a red shirt for 2017. Or if you've got even a senior on your team that only played in 2 or 3 games his freshman year, right, which meant he couldn't claim that as a red shirt year, he can't go back and claim that as a redshirt year now and gain an extra year of eligibility for next year. So it's not retroactive, but it is effective immediately for the 2018 season. So it's going to be interesting to watch how different coaches choose to apply this rule change to their own particular teams throughout the season. I mentioned the cupcake teams, and everybody plays them. Some play them in the beginning of the season, some play them more towards the end. In Georgia's case this year, we have Austin P towards week 1, and then we've got another middle school team. So it wouldn't surprise me at all, Georgia fans, to see some of these players in the class of 2018 that normally we would not get to see at all this year. Wouldn't surprise me at all to see a lot, if not all, of those true freshman players play in at least 2 or 3 games for the Georgia Bulldogs this year. It gives these kids a ton of experience. And people say, well, how much real experience can you really get, Lou, from playing against Austin Peay or whatever? It's not just about the talent level of the team you're playing against. It's everything involved. It's being on the field in front of 100,000 people for the first time. It's getting some of those jitters and nerves and butterflies and stuff out of these players' stomachs in meaningless games their freshman year, so that when they are a starter the following year or the year after, or getting significant playing time the following year, whatever the case may be, it's not their first experience stepping on the field to play college football. So I think it's a huge deal. I really do. I think it's great for everybody involved. This is one of those rare instances where a rule change is actually good for everyone, right? Usually when they tinker with something or change something or whatever, it benefits somebody or some particular group and hurts somebody or some particular group. And there's an argument between those two groups about getting the rule passed or whatever the case may be. This seems to be a positive winning situation for coaches, players, and even fans. Let's be real. We hype these recruiting classes up so much now. These kids come in, and then a lot of times we don't get to see them play for 2 or 3 years because they're redshirted and then stuck on the depth chart and things like that. I don't think that'll be the case anymore. So if you're a Georgia fan and you really like Cade Mays, you'll probably get to see him play at some point this year. Tyson Campbell, Justin Fields. You get the idea. And it doesn't matter, Georgia fan, just change the word Georgia and put whatever your team is in there. You'll get to see these guys play their first year on campus in a lot of cases, whereas normally you wouldn't have got to see that. So I'm a big fan of this new rule. This is something that's been talked about for a couple of years now, especially the bowl game thing. I know last year they were considering a rule change saying you can play anybody you want in the bowl game without burning their eligibility. That was sort of their answer to the players choosing to sit out the bowl game. But teams were like, listen, I got 2 or 3 of my players sitting out for the bowl game waiting on the NFL draft. I should be able to play these other guys without ruining an entire season's worth of eligibility. Well, NCAA agrees. So you get up to 4 games now. Like I said, a huge deal. One more thing I'll touch on is the medical redshirt situation, which those rules still apply. But the medical redshirt situation was hard to qualify for. The injury had to happen in the first half of the season, and you couldn't have participated in more than 3 games up to that point. So basically that meant you had to get hurt in week 1 through 6, but you only could have played in 3 of those weeks. If you didn't meet all that criteria and then you got hurt with a season-ending injury, you weren't eligible for a medical redshirt. That's not the case now. A kid can play in week 1 against a high school team, not play at all weeks 2 through 8, put him out there a little bit week 9, blows his knee out. Normally, since that's in the second half of the season, week 9, that kid would have lost an entire year's worth of eligibility just for playing a little bit in week 1 and a little bit in week 9, even though he got injured and blew his knee out. Now, even though he doesn't qualify for the medical red shirt, he could come back and take the normal, regular red shirt because he only participated in 2 games, right? So I just think this is a win all the way around. Coaches, players, and fans should all be happy with this new rule change, and I'm looking forward to seeing how these coaches and teams apply it in 2018 and going forward. Anyway, that's it. Hope you enjoyed it. Hit the thumbs up, subscribe if you're not already, and I will see you very soon. Have a good morning.